Many people believe that the Trojan horse represents the point at which human intelligence overcomes physical prowess. In order to transform the knight into victory, an army that is unable to breach walls devises a ruse and hides in the belly of a massive offering. But this magnificent vision already poses a danger in the Odyssey. Ulysses does not return home as a crowned hero, where he eventually escapes Troy. He enters a world where all of the traits that kept him alive during the conflict is gone. His boldness, his willingness to take risks, and his conviction that he is more skilled than others can now be used against him. This change is what makes Christopher Nolan's decision so intriguing. Following Oppenheimer, the filmmaker focused on one of the central stories of Western literature rather than another contemporary historical character. The Odyssey is portrayed by Universal as a mythological action epic that was shot in multiple nations and was intended to be the first feature picture to use just IMAX cameras. Charlize Theron plays Calypso, Tom Holland plays Telemachus, and Hathaway plays Penelope, and Matt Damon plays Odysseus. The movie will be released on July 17, 2026. But before this journey begins, an honest limit needs to be established. The full version of the movie has not yet been released to the general public at the time this story is written. As a result, nobody can accurately describe its final edit, every scene, or the precise liberties that Nolan took. On the other hand, there is already a great deal that we can analyze, the elements that have been officially disclosed, the visuals from the trailers, the poem structure ascribed to Homer, the confirmed character choices, and most importantly, the emotional reasoning that links the Trojan War to a man's unattainable return to his homeland. Because the Odyssey tells more than just the tale of a sea voyage. Troy and Ithaca appear to be in the same globe on a map. 10 years of wandering, lost friends, the wrath of the gods, necessary lies, and an increasingly agonizing question: can one still return to the person they were before leaving separate them in Ulysses' life? Before Troy, Ulysses lived for 10 years. His son Telemachus is no longer the baby he left behind when he eventually sails ship. He is a young man who was raised under the shadow of a well-known but unseen father. He is aware of the military might, the tales of valor, and the reputation of the crafty monarch. He doesn't really know the man. The narrative features two travels that are mirror images of one another because of this. While Telemachus struggles to figure out whether he can become himself without ever having his father's direct example, Ulysses seeks to retake his country. The absence is no longer a personal grief in Ithaca. A political crisis has arisen. Suitors take over the royal home, eat the reserves, kill the animals, and put pressure on Penelope to choose a new spouse. Their existence is predicated on a straightforward notion: Ulysses is most likely dead. His authority is but a memory, and the person who marries his wife can take his place. Telemachus observes that these men are acting as though they have already taken control of his home. He is not strong enough to push them away, but he is old enough to comprehend the humiliation. In contrast, Penelope uses the weapons at her disposal to resist. In the poem, she says she will decide until she has completed a funeral shroud for Ulysses' father, Laertes. She weaves during the day while being closely observed. She undoes her labor in stealth at night. This is not a passive gesture at all. She safeguards her son's validity, buys her time, and maintains the prospect of a return with each thread she cuts. While Odysseus is renowned for his military tactics, Penelope employs an equally accurate domestic ruse. Despite the oceans separating them, their intelligence is still functioning at the same rate. The selection of Tom Holland for Telemachus and Anne Hathaway for Penelope already suggests the likely significance of this endangered home. The core of the poem would be lost in a rendition that merely depicted the creatures. The biggest peril is on Ithaca, where Odysseus can survive all the horrors and still find that his place has been taken, that his kid does not recognize him, and that his wife has had to learn to live without him. However, the Cyclops, the Sirens, Circe, Scylla, or Charybdis captivate the imagination. This is the point at which the story's temporality becomes crucial. The moment the ships depart Troy is not when Homer's poem starts, It puts us in a position of prolonged absence. The gods debate the fate of a man who appears to have vanished from history. Telemachus endures the suitors, and Ulysses is detained far from Ithaca. The most well-known experiences are then described as recollections. Put another way, the Odyssey was a fractured story long before non-linear montages gained popularity in contemporary film. The reason the survivor we find is so different from the monarch who had set sail, because the past does not come back to enhance the action. In this initial picture of Ulysses, Calypso plays a significant role. She holds him on her island 4 years. According to the ancient text, she has the power to provide him with desire, security, and perhaps a kind of eternity. It seems possible to suspend everything that scares men, including aging, death, and loss. However, Ulysses considers Ithaca as he gazes out to sea. He would rather live a mortal life with Penelope than live forever somewhere else. This choice reflects the epic's own motivation. A bigger realm is not what Odysseus is looking for. He's not looking for a secret treasure. He longs for a humble house in contrast to the heavenly palaces, a rocky island in contrast to the paradises he travels through, and a human woman in contrast to the goddesses that lust after him. His objective gets easier as the journey gets more amazing. The storms are given weight by this contrast. They do not deprive him of an abstract victory, but rather of a shared supper, a bed he made himself, and a son he has not witnessed grow up. Therefore, Charlize Theron's confirmed appearance as Calypso promises more than simply a sensual stopover. It presents Ulysses with an almost deliverance-like temptation. Remaining entails giving up both risk and his individuality. Leaving entails acknowledging that everything could yet be taken from him by the water, because the comfort supplied comes at an unseen cost. Forgetting who is waiting for him, the hero chooses peril. In this reality, the gods are more than just ornamental elements. They take human disputes to a celestial level, because Athena sees knowledge, caution, and the skill of diversion in Ulysses. She defends him. However, following the encounter with his son, Polyphemus, the Cyclops, Poseidon turns against him. After that, the voyage becomes an unbalanced conflict between a sailor and the force of the water. Ulysses is able to predict an ambush, trick an adversary, and change his strategy. He can't make the sea stay calm. Every choice has a wider impact because of this divine animosity. In many adventures, an error results in a local barrier. In this case, pride might cause misery to last 4 years. Being victorious over a monster does not ensure survival. Instead, it may draw an even more lethal retaliation. Odysseus discovers that while cunning helps him get out of a cave, it doesn't always shield him from his own need for approval. Troy comes before this lesson. The film's depiction of the wooden horse and the pandemonium of widespread combat is confirmed by the latest trailer. This decision is significant since the fall of Troy represents both the height of Odysseus's fame and the beginning of his demise. He discovered the strategy that made it possible for the Greeks to overcome obstacles. However, winning a battle does not teach you how to return home. Domination, quickness, and occasionally harshness are required by military reasoning. Patience, self-control, and the capacity to acknowledge that you are not in control of everything are necessary for the return. For a long time, Nolan has been fascinated by those who create mechanisms bigger than themselves only to find that they are unable to control the outcomes. Odysseus is a perfect fit for this strain. The Trojan horse is a flawless narrative device, a wonderful concept that simultaneously unlocks a city and ushers in a time of bloodshed from which no one escapes unharmed. How Nolan will depict the monsters is not the only question. It is to find out what kind of man will eventually make it to Ithaca, and what kind of man will come out of this horse's belly. The survivors may think that the toughest part is over when the Greek ships depart Troy's shores. They were under siege for 10 years. They have witnessed the collapse of friends, princes, and heroes whose names seem to go down in history. In contrast, the water nearly seems to provide relaxation. Many men are still under Odysseus' command. He has the reputation as someone who made triumph possible. Ships, weapons, and fighting expertise. However, the habits of war accompany this navy. That's where the true issue starts. Because they have abandoned Troy, the soldiers do not instantly become husbands, dads, or farmers once more. They still think like winners, taking what they can, and using force to deal with the unknown. According to the Homeric legend, they loot and then launch a counterattack on their initial visit to the Chicones. Odysseus gives the order to go, but his troops misjudge the people they have just attacked, hesitate, and take advantage of the wealth. There are reinforcements. The simple win results in needless defeats. The moral rule of the journey that one does not quit the battle the moment one boards a ship would be immediately established if this part were kept or revoked by the movie. It spreads through pride, reflexes, and the delusion that the entire world may be viewed as conquered. Although Ulysses detects the threat before the others, comprehension is not always sufficient to give orders. His power rests on soldiers who are worn out, desperate for recompense after 10 years of hardship, uncertain that their leader will find a way out if something goes wrong. The threat then takes on a new shape in the realm of the Lotus Eaters. There's no army in front, no wall to scale, and no monster to kill. The yearning to go back is erased by the Lotus. After tasting it, people want to stay. The house, the responsibilities, and the faces that awaited them are all forgotten. This oblivion is almost peaceful, though the chaos of Troy. It is a different kind of death for Ulysses. Although his friends are still alive, their tale is over, because they have forgotten what they have lost. They are no longer in pain. To keep this sweetness from consuming them, he has to drag them back to the ships and bind them. The alternative is to give up their identity, even though the gesture is cruel. Two competing traps are presented to him from the outset of the journey: the violence that the troops refuse to leave behind, and the rest that urges them to forget why they wish to return. Ulysses' challenge rests in the middle of these two extremes. He needs to have the drive to keep going without allowing it to become conceit. He needs to keep in mind Ithaca without being obsessed with it, even though his men's repeated decisions make it nearly hard to safeguard them. He must do so. His intelligence will soon come into contact with a force it cannot directly oppose on a territory that appears to offer chaos, a cave, and sustenance. Ulysses and a few friends will go into Polyphemus' cave. There, he will discover a door that is too massive to lift, a monster, and the son of Poseidon. Now, a few soldiers stuck in the dark must be saved by the same method that brought down Troy. But there will be a course to success this time, because it is possible to trick, blind, and vanquish the Cyclops. Ulysses' pride, however, will continue to be fully awake. At first glance, Polyphemus' grotto appears deserted. Before departing once more, Ulysses and his friends find cheeses, milk, and lambs, everything they require to recover their strength. The men suggest a straightforward course of action: get some supplies, board the ships, and vanish before the owner comes back. Ulysses declines. One of the most crucial choices he made on his trip was this rejection. He stays because he wants to see who lives here, not because he is hungry. It's possible that he wants to accept the presents that are often required of a host by the laws of hospitality. In order to satiate his curiosity, which has frequently rendered him more powerful than his enemies, he also aims to gauge this unknown. He won Troy by watching the enemy and learning about their routines. The same instinct prompts him to wait for a danger he could have averted in the cave. Upon his return, Polyphemus seals the door behind him with an immovable rock. The cave is no longer a refuge at that point. It turns into a jail. The Cyclops disregards the word of strangers, the rules of hospitality, and the fear of the gods. When he asks Ulysses where his ship is, Ulysses realizes right away that the giant would be able to destroy any chance of escape if he knew the truth. He tells falsehoods. According to him, the boat crashed onto the rocks. The men who stayed on the coast are likely saved by this reaction, but those inside the cave are not. Polyphemus captures two friends and brutally murders them, shattering all notion of compromise. When the monster is sleeping, Ulysses initially considers pulling his sword. He may attack the throat or the chest, but since no one could move the boulder that obstructs the escape, murdering the Cyclops would also condemn the inmates. Thus, strength is meaningless. Odysseus needs to figure out how to defeat his adversary without taking away the one force that can open the door. He develops into the figure that has been remembered for ages in precisely this kind of impasse. After observing Polyphemus' club, he selects a long piece of wood, forms it, and cures it in the fire before creating a plan in which every feature depends on the one before it. He presents a very potent wine to the Cyclops. After drinking and requesting more, Polyphemus asks what the stranger's name is, which seems to give him the upper hand. In response, Ulysses says that nobody is his name. The simplicity of this falsehood is almost infantile, yet its power comes from how the agony of the Cyclops would soon be interpreted by others. Ulysses and his friends heat the stake and drive it into Polyphemus's lone eye. When he passes out from the effects of the liquor, the behemoth lets out a scream. He is asked who is attacking by the nearby Cyclopes as they dash out of the cave. No one, he answers. Convinced that there is no human enemy, the others depart. Ulysses' existence is erased by the term that was meant to identify him. He temporarily gives up the prestige associated with his true name to survive. The trek will teach him this lesson once more. Identification may either protect or draw death. However, the plan is not yet complete. The blind Polyphemus moves the rock to release his flock, to prevent the inmates from escaping by riding the beasts. He stands at the door and rubs their backs. Ulysses had expected this action. He suspends himself beneath the biggest animal, rather tying his men beneath the ram's bellies. The Cyclops speaks to the beast with remarkable affection and strokes its back, but it is unable to sense the man concealed beneath its wool. A peculiar inversion is produced by the scene. While the hero must crawl beneath the animals to reclaim his freedom, the monster that slaughtered Ulysses' companions displays affection for them. No noble duel, no heroic stance, no light. Silence, humiliation, and patience are necessary for survival. The men dash outdoors in the direction of their ships. They were successful. They still have enough time to get off the island before Polyphemus can pursue them. This should be the end of the danger. However, Ulysses finds it intolerable that his rival is unaware of the identity of the person who vanquished him. He mocks the Cyclops from his ship's deck. His friends attempt to stop him. They are aware that the behemoth is still capable of hurling rocks into the ocean. Odysseus is adamant. At last, he discloses his identity, his kingdom, and his ancestry. He wants Polyphemus to understand that Odysseus, the ruler of Ithaca, vanquished him, not by accident or an unidentified man. A flawless win turns into a long-lasting disaster due to this drive for credit. Then Polyphemus realizes that Odysseus was the target of an old prophecy. He calls Poseidon, his father, and requests that he exact revenge on the person who caused his blindness. If Ulysses is to come home, it should be late, by himself, after he has lost all of his friends, and it should also bring him misfortune. This petition is heard by the sea god. The story does not denigrate Ulysses' intelligence. The whole group would have perished in the cave without it. He denounces the point at which intelligence turns into conceit. After his achievement, the hero could not stand to stay unknown. Even if he knew how to hide behind the identity of no one, he desired to take full responsibility for his triumph. As a result, he offers Poseidon the precise object of his rage by giving him his real name. Because of this paradox, Ulysses is incredibly human. He has the ability to predict an opponent's next move, think several steps ahead, and use linguistic rules as a weapon. However, he is still susceptible to the joy of admiration. It is insufficient to keep him alive. He wants his victory to be recorded in history. This conflict between the required obscurity and the risky notoriety has a special power in a Christopher Nolan adaptation. Many of his protagonists establish their identities around goals or concepts, only to find that these constructions jeopardize the things they were attempting to defend. For Ulysses, the name represents a political strength, a history, and a vulnerability. He will have to be acknowledged in Ithaca. He can be destroyed at sea if his adversaries recognize him. The ships arrive at the island of Aeolus, the Lord of the Wines, following the Cyclops. After welcoming Ulysses and hearing his story, Aeolus gives him a gift that will enable the return, a sack that contains all of the opposing wines. The flotilla can only be propelled toward Ithaca by the favorable breeze. The plan works for a few days. The ship is steered by Odysseus himself. Because success now rests on a steady course, and the secret in the bag, he practically won't go to sleep. The shores of Ithaca finally come into view. The men can see the fires on the shore since they are so close. After that, Ulysses nods off. His friends start to doubt their leader as they examine the locked package. They envision Aeolus offering him treasures or gold, which he declines to part with. Their avarice is not the only reason for this mistrust. It exposes a persistent issue between Ulysses and his crew. Although he conceals his plans, he frequently recognizes the risks before they do. He doesn't always provide them with all the information, yet he nevertheless wants their compliance. He can fool adversaries with this tactic, but it erodes the confidence of those who accompany him. The wineskin is opened by the males at once. All of the wines are freed. The ships are driven toward the island of Aeolus after being torn from the coasts of Ithaca by the storm. You could see the house. The return was nearly finished. Years of work can be undone in a single night. Then, Ulysses' waking must endure a suffering distinct from fear. He was searching for a way out in front of Polyphemus. Here, he arrives at the exit and watches it vanish. For a brief period, he considers plunging into the ocean. He is now a man who is unsure of how many more chances he has to start anew with other than a warrior battling an enemy. The Lord of the Wines declines his request for assistance when he goes back to Aeolus. He sees this disaster as evidence that the gods despise Ulysses. Helping a guy who is being sought by a heavenly force in a sign-driven culture runs the risk of drawing that power onto oneself. As a result, Ulysses leaves without the gift that would have saved him. The tale reveals a harsh mechanism. The hero helped create the circumstances that led to his misery, yet he is not entirely to blame for it. The bag was opened by his guys. However, in a system where the leader is the only one with the secrets, their mistrust increased. When Ulysses manipulates an adversary, his brilliance is still useful. It can cause distance. While he is with his own friends, the fleet grows smaller. This distance becomes increasingly hazardous. After that, the ships reach the Laestrygonians' homeland. The port looks to have a limited entrance and towering cliffs for protection. Nearly all of the captains navigate their vessels inside. Ulysses keeps his outside, tied close to the opening, out of caution or instinct. The survival of everything that is left depends on this information. The locals are not kind hosts. They are giants that hurl massive rocks at the ships stuck in the harbor, attack the scouts, and congregate on the heights. There is no space for the boats to move about. The soldiers plunge into the water behind a shower of stones as the masts shatter and the hulls fracture. After severing his own ship's rope, Ulysses gives the command to row. He can get away thanks to his caution, but he is unable to save the others. The fleet he had left Troy with virtually vanishes in a couple of seconds. There's just one ship left. The story's scale is altered in this section. Up until recently, a sizable group could still endure each loss. All of the survivors are now in the same boat. The difference between Ulysses' orders and the results of his choices has vanished. The hero gets closer to Polyphemus' curse with each lost man. There is also a sense of restriction to the voyage. Encircled by captains and troops, Ulysses had started forth. His environment becomes empty as he gets closer to his objective. The familiar faces turn into memories, the ships vanish, and the resources diminish. He gradually loses all that made him a war chief on the voyage home. Rather than returning to prosperity, the final ship then arrives to Circe's native island of Aeaea. With every new land, the men are scared, hungry, and worn out. Odysseus splits the gang in half. A portion of the companions follow Eurylochus into the island's interior. They find a home encircled by oddly submissive wild creatures. Wolves and lions act like tamed animals. They are still unaware that these animals might have been mankind. Circe works at her loom indoors, while singing. She greets the travelers, feeds them a meal, adds something to their drink, and then uses her wand to touch them. The males are changed into pigs. Although their voice and appearance change, their human spirit is still trapped in these new bodies. Eurylochus avoids the trap by remaining outside due to mistrust. He tells Ulysses what transpired when he gets back to him. His response is instantaneous. He grabs his sword and walks off by himself. This may appear to be a careless gesture. Ulysses confronts a power he does not comprehend, endangering the final group of survivors after all the losses. However, leaving his friends behind would mean turning into a leader who is only thinking on getting back. He won't abandon the other ships, imprisoned in animal form, because he has already failed to save them. Along the way, the god Hermes shows up and bestows upon him Moly, a protective plant. He tells him how to thwart Circe's potion and compel her to let the men go. Therefore, human ingenuity is not the only factor that determines victory. Additionally, Odysseus survives because a divine force teaches him the laws of peril. He walks into the house. Circe gives him the same beverage. When Ulysses drinks it, nothing happens. He pulls out his sword when she wields her wand. The sorceress encounters a guy, for the first time, who her might is unable to defeat. Then she recognizes the person in front of her. The prophecy she was aware of said that Ulysses would eventually reach her island. The adversary turns into an ally. She greets the travelers and transforms the companions back into humans. The island provides beds, food, and seeming protection after the storm, the massacre, and the hunger. The men remain for a whole year. Given that Ithaca is still the stated objective, this number is astounding. But Ulysses slows down when the threat disappears. Eventually, his friends had to remind him to come back. The hero, who is able to withstand the lotus, finds an alternative method of forgetting himself, comfort rather than memory erasure. Thus, Circe is more than just a barrier. She stands for a moment of suspension in which urgency appears to vanish. With her, Ulysses can no longer be the absent spouse, the leader of a lost fleet, or the father of a grown kid. He is able to live in a closed-off presence. However, this relaxation is short-lived. When he eventually asks Circe how to get to Ithaca, she responds in a way that no one would want to hear. Ulysses must go down to the world of the dead before he may return to the land of the living. To find out what the gods still require, he must seek out the shade of the sea of Tiresias. The sea is insufficient now. Ulysses must pass a barrier that no navigator can measure in order to find his home, a location where strength, bravery, and intelligence guarantee nothing, and some of the shadows that will come toward him will deliver news that he wasn't prepared to hear. CISC points Ulysses in the direction of the boundaries of the known world, where the waves meet a mist-covered continent and the light appears to wane. He couldn't prepare for this conflict with weaponry. The dead have no food to lust for, no doors to force, and no bodies to harm. Ulysses must carry out a certain ceremony, dig a hole, pour offerings, and let the blood of sacrificial animals to flow in order to attract them. Then the shadows start to form, attracted by the life in the blood. They come. They swarm around the hole, hungry and frail, as though death had preserved their memories, while robbing them of the material necessary to express them. In front of them, Ulysses brandished his sword, since only the seer is aware of the path that could lead them back to Ithaca. He is unable to permit any soul to consume alcohol prior to Tiresias' arrival. Elpena's face is one of the first he recognizes. This friend did not perish in the valiant conflict. He was not carried away by a storm, eaten by a monster, or crushed by a giant. After a night of intoxication on the island of Circe, he dozed off on the house's roof. He was startled awake, lost sight of the ladder, fell, and shattered his neck. Without finding his body, the others departed. The epic's grandeur stands in stark contrast to this nearly ridiculous death. It serves as a reminder that males do not always vanish in situations that call for singing. Some pass away in bewilderment, out of sight of onlookers, and run the risk of being forgotten because the adventure goes on without them. Alpine or requests that Odysseus go back to the island, burn his corpse, erect a tomb, and plant the ore he once used. He doesn't want glory or retribution. All he wants is to be given the ceremonies that will enable his spirit to enter the hereafter. Odysseus concurs. In light of the impending threats, this vow might seem insignificant, yet it gauges the hero's development. He tried to introduce himself to the Cyclops at the start of the expedition. He has to protect the name of a man who might never be sung in the hereafter. Being acknowledged for one's achievements is no longer the only aspect of honor. It entails not deserting people who have traveled under his leadership. Then Ulysses notices another shadow, Anticlea, his mother. She was still alive when he departed Ithaca to fight in the war. He was unaware that she had passed away while he was away, but he has to stop her from consuming alcohol in front of Tiresias. He recognizes her face, sees her close to him, and realizes that a fresh grieving has just been added to all the others, but he continues to follow the instructions. He must momentarily refuse to question the person he most wants to, in order to maintain the discipline required to continue his journey. At last, Tiresias shows up. The seer maintains a certain clarity in contrast to the other shadows. After consuming the blood, he identifies Ulysses and tells him that Poseidon is still after the person who blinded his son. The return is still feasible, but it will need the soldiers to abstain from touching the god Helios' precious lambs and cows once they get on his island. There's nothing difficult about this suggestion. Odysseus won't have to solve a puzzle or vanquish an army. All he needs to do is respect a boundary, hold back, and get his friends to follow suit. Tiresias, however, makes clear what will happen if this threshold is exceeded. The ship is about to be destroyed. The friends will perish. On a foreign ship, Ulysses will return to Ithaca late and by himself. The voyage won't be finished even then, because men will have broken into his home and eaten his possessions. While feigning to wed Penelope, Ulysses receives a dreadful revelation from the prophecy. He is now aware that the house of his dreams has not survived. The house is still there, but it's occupied. There won't be a calm arrival at the ports and the happy acknowledgement upon his return. He will have to go into hiding, watch, judge those who stuck with him, and use force to take back his position. Tiresias transcends this conflict even farther. Ulysses will have to go once more with an oar on his shoulder after re-establishing order in Ithaca. He will travel inland until he encounters people who are not familiar with the sea, at which point they will use this oar as a tool for farming. He will only be able to placate the power he is aroused by making a sacrifice to Poseidon there, because the entire voyage is reversed. The visual is amazing. A piece of the sea must be transported to an unidentified location by Ulysses, a sailor who is being chased by the ocean. Returning won't be sufficient to bring about peace. The tale of his wanderings outside of his own country will have to be told. Anticlea can finally get close after Tiresias leaves. After drinking, she's able to speak again. She's questioned by Ulysses about her death, her father's fate, Telemachus' actions, and most importantly, if Penelope stayed faithful to him. The explanations make Ithaca more agonizing, but also bring it closer. Penelope stays in the house, surrounded by sadness. Telemachus attempts to uphold his family's status and keeps the lambs. Because of his son's disappearance, Laertes has retreated to the countryside and led a simple life. Anticlea then discloses that neither a violent disease nor a weapon was the cause of her own demise. Weary from wanting to see Ulysses again, she passed away from despair. The hero makes an attempt to embrace her. He approaches her 3 times. His hands move across her body 3 times, as though attempting to contain smoke. He's smart enough to trick the Cyclops and strong enough to battle soldiers, but no force can bring him back in touch with his mother. The scenario encapsulates the pain of the delayed return. Even if he eventually makes it to Ithaca, some relationships cannot be mended. After that, Ulysses encounters the spirits of a number of Trojan war figures. He's informed of Agamemnon's demise. When the triumphant commander went home, people who were waiting for him killed him. His narrative turns the house into a dangerous place. Being safe does not equate to returning. After 10 years of fighting, a man can pass away the instant he thinks he has won his life back. This tale underlines how important Ulysses' prudence is. He won't be able to claim the throne as soon as he arrives in Ithaca. He will need to hide who he is, confirm everyone's allegiance, and find out what transpired while he was away. He also sees Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior whose fame was meant to last for generations. By reminding him of his great honor among the living and his position among the dead, Ulysses tries to console him. Achilles, however, refuses this comfort. Instead of ruling over all the shadows, he would rather serve a poor man on earth. The Trojan War's prevailing heroic ideal he undermined by this reaction. Achilles had made the decision to live a brief but eternally glorious life. He calculates the actual cost of this transaction in death. The light of day, the ability to move our bodies, and the chance to touch the people we love are all things that fame cannot replace. The lesson is simple for Ulysses. He must not look for a spectacular demise that will guarantee his legend. He has to live. More important than the songs about his adventures are the house, the wife, and the boy. The memory of Achilles should serve as a constant reminder to him that sometimes the most valuable victory is simply surviving. However, the afterlife offers more than just solutions. Anyone who listens for too long is in danger of being engulfed. Ulysses worries that a more horrible force may emerge from the depths as the shadows grow in number and intensity. As a result, he departs this area where the past can talk without ever resurrecting himself and heads back to his ship. He returns to Circe before beginning his quest. He honors his pledge to Elpenor. The companions or is placed atop the raised tomb after the body has been burnt. Circe instantly initiates a new debt by outlining the difficulties the ship will face once this gesture settles the previous one. The first originates with the sirens. They don't use weapons or claws to hunt sailors. They sing. Their sounds offer complete knowledge and comprehension that can satiate the listener's deepest desires. They are aware of the events at Troy. They are aware of the hardships, choices, and secrets. The call is nearly ideal for Ulysses, whose life has always depended on his ability to comprehend. He learns from Circe how to pass without losing the ship. The companion's ears need to be wax-plugged. Ulysses will need to be bound to the mast in order to hear the song. Regardless of his entreaties, he will issue the order not to be released. A new kind of intelligence is shown by this preparation. Ulysses does not assert that his resolve will be his only means of resistance. He anticipates his own vulnerability and is aware of his interest. He creates a scenario where the sensible choice he is making now cannot be reversed by his subsequent actions. The wind lessens as the island of the Sirens gets closer. The globe seems to be holding its breath as the sea becomes serene and nearly motionless. With the strength of their arms, the men pull in the sails, grab the oars, and advance. Odysseus seals each companion's ears after cutting and heating wax. They then firmly bind him to the mast. The song gets louder. He's not merely promised pleasure by the Sirens. They talk about who he is. They claim that whoever hears them will be more informed, invoke the grandeur of the Greeks, and are aware of his name. Unlike the Lotus, they do not ask him to forget Ulysses. Rather, they allow him the opportunity to become more fully the guy he thinks he is, the man who is knowledgeable, perceptive, and able to unlock the mysteries that others choose to overlook. Ulysses gives the command to free him. His friends don't hear him. They only witness his face changing, his body straining against the chains, and his tongue forming incomprehensible sounds. He makes movements at them, possibly making threats or pleading with them. Perimedes and Eurylochus strengthen the ties. The ship keeps going. Reverse trust is the foundation of the scene. The friends had previously opened the bag of wines in defiance of Ulysses. They precisely save him this time by disobeying him. The order he provided before the music took over is now the correct one. not the one that comes out of his mouth at that very moment. The guys untie their commander and remove the wax as the island vanishes behind them. Odysseus achieved his goal. He lived and was able to hear what no other crew member could. However, this triumph gives them no respite. Circe had declared to roots, the roving rocks, which have the power to smash ships, are close by. The other travels through a strait that is dominated by two threats: Scylla, a creature concealed in the cliff with several heads that can take sailors straight from the deck, and Charybdis, a sea whirlpool that draws in and then spits out the waters. Of course, Odysseus wants to know how to combat Scylla. He still thinks like a warrior. Circe responds, "There isn't a duel to win. The losses would only rise if you stop to face the monster. We have to move fast and acknowledge that some men will be captured. Of all the instructions, this one is probably the most intolerable. Up until now, Ulysses has looked for strategies that could save the group. He declined to kill the giant in front of Polyphemus, since doing so would have condemned everyone. He put his life in danger at Circe's to set the altered companions free. There is no ideal way to deal with Scylla. In order for the remaining men to continue, the captain must decide which course will result in the deaths of several men. Even worse, he chooses not to tell his crew the real truth. He worries that the rowers would try to hide under the bridge or leave their posts, since they are so terrified. He tells them about Charybdis and gives them the order to row as hard as they can, but he doesn't reveal the precise number of casualties. One could argue that the decision was necessary. Nevertheless, it demonstrates how Ulysses and his men are at odds. He guides them toward a sacrifice he's already familiar with. They proceed without realizing that 6 of their friends will be ripped off the spacecraft in a matter of seconds. Everyone looks at Charybdis as the strait closes behind them. The boat trembles as the water swirls and plunges into a chasm. The rowers fight to avoid being drawn in. Ulysses himself looks at this obvious chasm, waiting for the time when the entire ship could be engulfed by it. Scylla is waiting for precisely that. The monster's necks unfold from the rock. At once, 6 heads strike. They all seize a man who is still alive and carry him over the bridge. The victims extend their arms toward Ulysses and address him by name. He notices them. He is unable to ascend the cliff, stop the boat, or launch an attack that might save them. He has to keep going, while 6 of his friends are swept away in front of him, 0 for the others to live. And he will view this vision as one of the most agonizing of all his wanderings, since it turns survival into a guilty decision and command into helplessness. Survival no longer tastes like victory when the ship leaves the strait. The only thing that the surviving 6 guys know is that they have survived a threat that their boss was more aware of than they were. Odysseus is unable to return the abducted friends, since Scylla was not engaged in combat. He is unable to provide them with the comfort of an honorable defeat. As Circe had predicted, she had stolen her part. The island of Thrinacia, where the holy herds of the sun god Helios graze, is now in front of them. Odysseus is aware of Tiresias' prophecy. Circe said it again. He is aware that these animals must not be killed, captured, or eaten. This prohibition now forms the basis of the return's whole rationale. Ithaca is still reachable, as they go by without coming into contact with the animals. The crew and the ship will be lost if they cross the border. Thus, Ulysses would like to keep going. Eurylochus is against it. His points are difficult to refute. The men have just rowed between Scylla and Charybdis. They witness their friends being ripped off the bridge. Their limbs, focus, and self-control are all weakened by exhaustion. It can be just as terrible to cross the night at sea as it is to remain on the island. Eurylochus promises not to touch any animals in exchange for a single night of slumber. Although Ulysses agrees, he requires an oath. Only the ship's supplies will be used by the men. Helios herds will not perish. This guideline appears simple to adhere to at first. They may watch the animals without going near them, yet they still have food. Then the winds pick up and keep them from departing. The days pass. The reserves are getting smaller. Without violating the taboo, the men fish, search for birds, and make do with what the island has to offer. The storm is still going strong. The prophecy turns into a tangible trial at this point. It does not take the same will to obey the gods when one is hungry as it does to respect them when one's belly is full. A short distance distant, the holy oxen graze. They are conspicuous, many, and seemingly helpless. The men are aware that they run the risk of punishment, but this penalty is yet hypothetical. However, their bodies are suddenly overcome with hunger. Ulysses steps aside to offer prayers. He nods off, exhausted. Eurylochus persuades the others to sacrifice the animals. While he is away, his logic turns the infraction into a decision that is nearly logical. He believes that all deaths are terrible, but the most terrible is dying slowly from starvation. It would be better to eat, get stronger, and then, when they go back to Ithaca, promise Helios a splendid temple. Additionally, it is preferable to swiftly descend into the sea rather than perish on this island, if the god still desires their death. The crew's level of sorrow is evident in this statement. The men no longer genuinely hope to survive the trek. They bargain over various methods of passing away, using whatever resources they have. They select the most attractive animals, kill them, and offer them as a sacrifice. However, alarming indicators are emerging. The skins appear to crawl. Around the spits, the meat makes noises. The natural world will not allow one to think that these animals were commonplace. Even before he discovers the others, Ulysses can tell what happened by the scent of the food when he awakens. Nothing can be fixed by his rage. He had taken an oath, alerted the crew, and made an effort to comply. He's still their leader, though. His failure is also a result of their fault. Just as he had failed to maintain their confidence in front of Aeolus' sack, he was unable to guide them beyond hunger. Helios wants justice from Zeus to learning of his cattle's deaths. If those responsible are not held accountable, he threatens to descend and illumine the hereafter. Zeus then vows to attack their vessel. The men consume the sacred meat for a few more days, as if the world were giving them time to realize the seriousness of their acts. The heavy weather confines them to the island. At last, the wind shifts. They sailed once more. The sky rapidly grows darker. The storm arrives. Zeus gathers the clouds, and the ship is struck by a lightning bolt. The mast shatters. The hull breaks apart. One by one, the guys perish after being cast into the sea. Tiresias' prophecy comes to pass. Odysseus is still by himself. He collects pieces of wood, fastens the mast to the keel, and constructs an improvised raft for himself among the rubble. He has lost his ship, his soldiers, his provisions, and his power. He has lost all that made him the commander who came back from Troy. Then the wind returns him to Charybdis. The trip has an almost mechanical brutality because of this repetition. At the expense of 6 soldiers, Ulysses has already crossed the strait. Now he has to face it without a boat or a crew. He clings to the limbs of a fig tree that hangs over the river when the abyss sucks in his raft. He waits for Charybdis to vomit forth the trash she has ingested, while he holds on with the power of his arms. Ulysses lets himself fall, swims to the raft when it reappears, and then drifts away once more. This accomplishment is unnoticed by a companion. In Ithaca, no witness will be able to tell. The man who had desired to yell his name at Polyphemus now lives in total quiet. His glory is useless now. The next action is all that counts. Take hold of a branch, pause, take a breath, and move on. He drifts for 9 days, until arriving at Calypso's home, the island of Ogygia. The texture of the weather then shifts. The threats were obvious and violent up to this point. Ogygia seemed to be at ease. The house is safe, the water is clear, and there is a lot of vegetation. Ulysses is welcomed, taken care of, and given an endless life by Calypso. He stays with her for 7 years. After everything he has lost, this stay can seem like a prize. He is no longer required to guide disobedient mankind, decipher divine signs, or keep an eye out for storms. He is aware that there is a goddess who can grant him immortality, and who is attracted to him. However, Ulysses frequently sits by the sea during the day and gazes at a horizon that never reveals Ithaca, one of the Odyssey's most profound emotions, can be found in this picture. The man has achieved beauty, security, the love of an immortal, and the potential to avoid death, things that many heroes might want. However, none of these presents can take the place of the house he has selected. Ogygi is not a walled prison. It is a cage constructed out of an ideal life that is not his. Calypso suggests that he put aging behind him. Even though their faces have changed throughout time, Ulysses would rather find a mortal wife once more. His attraction is not based on a comparison of strength or beauty. It is based on a shared past that has been disrupted, but not completely obliterated. The gods debate his fate while he stays still. The hero suffers far from home. Athena reminds us. At last, Zeus gives the order to free him. Hermes travels to the island and informs Calypso of the choice. She objects. While a goddess who chooses a man must immediately forsake him upon Olympus's decision. Male gods are free to adore mortals without facing consequences. Her rage adds more nuance to the event than just a simple rescue. Although Calypso has retained Ulysses, she nevertheless perceives a genuine injustice. Because of rules set by other powers, she loses the person she loves. Nevertheless, she agrees to let him go. Odysseus has to construct his own raft. Calypso gives him the wood, the fabrics, the tools, and the food he needs. Concrete work marks the start of the recovery. There are 7 years of reliance. He trims the trees, modifies the beams, drills the parts, and puts together a ship that can endure the wide ocean. That his departure from Ogygia is anything but victorious. Knowing that he is unlikely to come back, Calypso assists him in leaving. Although Odysseus is set free, his adventure has left him a different person. The navigation continues without incident for 17 days. The territory of the Phaeacians is finally visible to him. After returning after a long journey, Poseidon learns that the other gods have encouraged the man he is pursuing to flee. The ocean rises. Ulysses nearly regrets not dying in front of Troy as Poseidon upsets the raft's equilibrium and unleashes a terrible storm. There, he would have been given a funeral, a tomb, and acknowledgement from his friends. If he dies by himself in the waves, he will vanish without leaving a body, and his family won't know what happened to him. I know, a marine deity, helps him. She offers him a veil for protection and tells him to get off the raft and swim. Ulysses pauses. Even divine assistance can appear dubious after so many trickery and traps. He holds on to the wood until the whole thing falls apart. After that, he wraps the sail over himself and plunges into the ocean. He battles the seas for 2 days and 2 nights. When he eventually gets close to the coast, he finds rocks that could break his body in the ocean. He looks for a gap, locates a river's mouth, and offers prayers to the force that controls this waterway. He is able to reach the shore when the water slows down. After crawling out of the water, Ulysses takes off the veil and tosses it back into the ocean. He is hurt, nearly comatose, nude, and covered with salt. In order to avoid freezing to death, the king of Ithaca, who defeated Troy and survived monsters, must now hide under leaves in an unidentified woodland. Young women's voices wake him up the following day. The Phaeacian king's daughter Nausicaa arrived to wash clothes with her maidservants. They play by the river after work. The young ladies scream as a ball plunges into the sea, and Ulysses emerges from his hiding spot. Panic is triggered by his appearance. The maids run away. Nausicaa remains. Ulysses has to choose how to get close to her. He knows that making physical contact with the young woman would likely frighten her, but he may throw himself at her feet in accordance with the customary signs of supplication. He speaks and maintains his distance. Once more, his intelligence is employed to assess someone else's vulnerability rather than to defeat an adversary. He merely requests clothing and instructions to the city, compliments Nausicaa without coming across as menacing, and explains his tragedy without disclosing his full name. Once Nausicaa answers him respectfully. She reminds him that a stranger in need should be assisted, and that Zeus gives both happiness and misfortune to humans. She offers Ulysses clothes, food, and something to wash with after telling her maidservants to come back. Athena changes his appearance after the bath. Nausicaa looks at this stranger with renewed interest as he seems taller and more magnificent. She is aware, though, that rumors would start when they both arrived in the city. She then shows him how to get to the palace on his own, and how to beg his mother, Queen Arete, for assistance. Athena then sends a cloud to protect Ulysses as he enters the city of the Phaeacians. When he gets to the palace, he goes up to Arete, kisses her knees, and begs to be sent home. In accordance with the hospitality rules that Polyphemus had rejected, King Alcinous extends a warm welcome to him. A place, food, and the assurance of passage are offered to him. His name is still unknown. He's just a castaway who has to be saved. According to the Phaeacians, games are planned for the next day. At first, Ulysses declines to take part. The weariness of the water is still evident in his body. A young man thinks that the stranger is more like a trader who is more focused on his earnings than an athlete. Interpreting this rejection as a lack of bravery, the injury directly targets the pride that Ulysses had to learn to restrain. He throws a discus farther than any of the other contestants. Then he asserts that he could compete against nearly every Phaeacian in the different tournaments. As a result, the hero's ancient fire is not put out. Even after losing his army, his ship, and nearly everything he owned, he is adamant that people value him. The distinction is that he hasn't yet revealed his name. He demonstrates his abilities without disclosing the identity that enrages. Poseidon, the bard Demodocus, sings about the Trojan events throughout the feast. Ulysses hears the story of the conflict he went through. The fact that one of the persons being sang about is seated among them is unknown to everyone around him. Ulysses covers his face and sobs as the bard describes the hero's arguments, the wooden horse, and the city's collapse. Glory is transformed into human remembrance by his tears. Troy is already a compelling tale for the Phaeacians. For him, it holds the weight of a prank whose repercussions still plague him. The voices of deceased friends and the laments of a shattered city. Alcinous is aware of his suffering. After interrupting the song, he finally poses the question that the traveller has been postponing for so long. What is this man's name? Where is his homeland? And why do the stories of Troy make him grieve as though he had lost a loved one? Ulysses is no longer a nobody. He eventually discloses his identity in front of those who have pledged to assist him. He is the crafty son of Laertes, Ulysses. His hometown is Ithaca. The next tale he recounts, which includes the Cyclops, Aeolus, Circe, the dead, the Sirens, Scylla, the sated herds, and Calypso, changes the quiet outcast into the man whose absence has already started to become legendary. The palace is silent after Ulysses concludes his story in front of the Phaeacians. A foreign people have been entrusted with the adventures that were previously only known to him and a few gods. By describing all that it has cost him, the anonymous castaway has reclaimed his identity. Then Alcinous fulfills his pledge. After loading their ship with presents, the Phaeacians take Ulysses aboard and return him to Ithaca. During the crossing, the hero nods off. He finally finished the final portion of the trek without issuing any commands after spending years observing the winds, keeping an eye out for rocks, and worrying about his friend's disobedience. Before he awakens, the sailors leave him on the shore with the wealth they have acquired. Ulysses does not instantly recognize his kingdom when he opens his eyes. The scenery is covered in a mist thanks to Athena. He feels alienated by the trees, the paths, and the hills. He even thinks he has been duped once more to so many delusions and diversions. The return has an odd tone because of this uncertainty. For 20 years, Odysseus yearned for Ithaca. However, he can't just glance around and feel at home once he gets there. His connection to the location has evolved over time. The dream house is no longer merely a physical location. It has evolved into an internal representation that is repeated amid storms and is most likely more stable than the actual coastline. Athena shows up as a young shepherd. Before even realizing who he is speaking to, Ulysses questions him and makes up a new narrative to explain why he's there and why the jewels are placed close to him. He just got back to his native country when he begins lying once more. The goddess grinned. She sees in incapacity to hide the truth even when there doesn't appear to be any immediate threat. Odysseus doesn't lie just because he has to. 20 years of wandering and fighting have made caution his way of life. He finds it nearly impossible to disclose too quickly what he knows, what he has, or what he wants. After clearing the mist, Athena reveals Ithaca to him. Ulysses gives the earth a kiss. The trip might end with the gesture, but Tiresias' prophecy still stands. The palace is still occupied by the suitors. Penelope is under attack. Telemachus runs the risk of losing both his inheritance and possibly his life. Although he has returned, the king has not yet taken back his residence. He hides the gifts in a cave from the Phaeacians with Athena's assistance. She then gives him an explanation of the circumstances. There are many, haughty, and armed suitors. 4 years, they have used up all of its resources to remove the final barrier to their control. Some are now thinking of killing Telemachus. It would be suicidal to assault directly. After that, the goddess changes Ulysses' look. His clothing turns into rags, his complexion wrinkles, his hair vanishes, and his physique bears the weariness of an elderly beggar. The monarch must find out who has been faithful to him before anyone can identify him. What the journey has already taught him takes on a visible form. Thanks to this disguise, Ulysses must erase his identity before he can recover it. He had become nobody in order to survive Polyphemus. He will enter his own home with a man who is unworthy of attention in order to survive the suitors. For her part, Athena visits Telemachus. In order to find out about his father. The young guy had left Ithaca. He had seen to former Trojan warriors, Nestor and Menelaus, under the guidance of the goddess. Although this excursion had not provided him with a conclusive solution, it had compelled him to abandon the role of the defenseless son. Telemachus had heard the stories of the war recounted in front of monarchs, and realized that the Greeks' return had been characterized by storms, treachery, and death. At last, Menelaus had informed him of intelligence obtained from the ancient sea god Proteus. Odysseus was still alive and imprisoned on the island of Calypso. This revelation had revived danger as well as hope. Telemachus' suitors had plotted an ambush for his return after learning of his departure. The young prince was no longer seen by them as a youngster who might be freely ridiculed. His initiative demonstrated that he was beginning to act. At this point, Athena tells him to hurry back and avert the trap. After disembarking from the main port, Telemachus makes his way to the residence of Eumaeus, Ulysses' devoted swineherd. The king in disguise sought sanctuary there as well. Another type of nobility is represented by Eumaeus. He has neither an army nor a palace. He is unaware that his master is seated in front of him because he lives among the animals. Nevertheless, he greets the elderly stranger, gives him food, and provides a place to stay. Every day, the suitors who pose as Ithaca's future kings break the hospitality rules in the palace. In contrast, Eumaeus honors them in a little cabin. He talks lovingly of Ulysses, but he doesn't trust the travelers who say they know when he will return. Penelope's hope has already been exploited by far too many men in order to obtain food or a reward. The phony beggar continues to assert that the monarch will soon return. Eumaeus is not persuaded. Then Ulysses learns how people who stayed faithful to him felt about his disappearance. The Trojan horse narrative is not told by the swineherd. He describes an invaded house, a just master, and a collapsing empire. For the first time in a long time, Ulysses is free to hear what people think of him without having to defend it. Soon after, Telemachus shows up. He is greeted by Eumaeus as a father would a son. Ulysses observes the young man going into the cottage. The baby he left behind in Ithaca is no longer there, and grown-up who is courageous enough to journey in pursuit of a man he hardly remembers stands in front of him. The king is still unable to disclose his identity. While Eumaeus introduces the visitor, he stays sat in his rags, while admitting that he cannot welcome him to the palace without subjecting him to the violence of the suitors. Telemachus promises him his protection. His remark already demonstrates how different he is from these men. Although Telemachus lacks the resources to completely assist the beggar, he does not treat his helplessness with disdain. After that, Eumaeus travels to let Penelope know that her son has returned. Ulysses' actual appearance is momentarily restored by Athena. Telemachus flinches. He thinks he has seen a god. The elderly traveler who entered the cabin no longer looks like the man in front of him. His father eventually came back, but Ulysses had to tell him that he is not a god. However, recognition is not instantaneous. Growing up, Telemachus was surrounded by rumors, false testimonies, and stories. For him, his father is an almost legendary character. It seems harder to accept a stranger taking on this role than the absence itself. Odysseus is adamant. Athena's appearance has changed. He's the one who endured all those years of suffering before coming back to Ithaca. Even if the clothes, skin, and face can be changed. In the end, Telemachus comes to believe him. The father and son cry and give each other a hug. The 20 years lost are not compensated for by this moment. Ulysses did not witness his child's first steps, did not hear his voice alter, and did not help him grow up. However, Telemachus has never experienced the day-to-day presence of the person whose heritage he bears. They encounter the closeness of two family members and the peculiarity of two guys who are still getting to know one another. Emotion quickly gives way to strategy. How many suitors are at the palace? Ulysses inquires. Telemachus informs him of the names of the many groups that originated on the various islands and helps him realize that they are too many to face head-on. Their odds appear to be virtually non-existent, even with Eumaeus and a few devoted followers. But Ulysses no longer thinks like an army commander. He doesn't try to outnumber his opponents. He wants to be in charge of the attack's location, information, and time. Telemachus has to go back to the palace, put up with the humiliations, and tell nobody, not even Penelope, that his father has returned. This is a painful duty. Even though he is only a few feet away from his wife, she will continue to be ignorant after waiting for Ulysses for so long. However, even the smallest hint could warn the potential suitors. The plan would be destroyed by an excessively forceful response, a badly hidden gaze, or a confidence overheard by a disloyal servant. The weapons that are suspended in the big hall must likewise be taken down by Telemachus. He will clarify that he wants to shield them from the smoke or stop a fight from starting at the dinners. In actuality, as the trap closes, he will deny the suitors the tools they need to resist. Only a small number of weapons will be retained by Ulysses and his companions. The Trojan horse is reminiscent of this preparation. Once more, a frontal strike is not a viable strategy. He must infiltrate the center of the occupied area while posing as someone else, wait for the adversary to feel secure, and then launch an internal attack. However, there is a significant moral difference. After years of conflict, Troy was a foreign city under siege. His own home is Ithaca. The men he will be judging have insulted his son, eaten at his table, and attempted to coerce his wife into replacing a husband whose death was never established. His family should have lived in peace on the battlefield. As a result, Telemachus goes back to the palace. When he returns, Penelope, who had been afraid for his life, gives him a hug. She's curious about what he's discovered. Telemachus keeps her father's return a secret while telling her some of the news. Conversely, the suitors are enraged. They failed in their ambush. Then, Antinous suggests a more straightforward course of action: assassinate Telemachus before he can rally support and establish his dominance. When Penelope finds out about the scheme, she confronts the men. Although Antinous asserts that his son is not in danger, the tension is evident despite his assertions. Penelope's tolerance does not imply that she is oblivious to the situation. She has spent years witnessing the relationships deceit, and aspirations of the people that live in her house. Eumaeus takes Ulysses to the city the following day. They encounter Melanthios, a goat herd who has betrayed the royal family and backs the suitors along the route. He makes fun of Eumaeus for selecting such a wretched friend, insults the beggar, and hits him. Odysseus doesn't answer. The warrior who had disobeyed Polyphemus now has to put up with being humiliated by a servant of his own realm. Every insult turns into a control test. His identity will be exposed before the plan is ready if he responds. With all the vigor he possesses, he then arrives to the palace. An old dog that has been abandoned on a mound of manure at the entrance is covered in ticks. Argos is his name. Before Ulysses left for Troy, he travelled with the hunters, once quick and strong. Since the master vanished, no one has been taking care of him. Argos raises his head as the beggar gets closer. Despite the rags, the aging, and Athena's wizardry, the dog knows who his master is. His tail wags feebly, and his ears move, because he is unable to halt the animal or address it by name. Ulysses covers his face with a tear. A few moments later, Argos passes away. After 20 years of waiting for Ulysses to return, his body finally gives out. The hero is not immediately recognized by his wife, son, or servants. It originates from an animal that is too frail to stand. This fleeting instant demonstrates everything that has been softly ruined by absence. The palace's wealth has been devoured by the suitors, but the deterioration extends beyond food and livestock. It manifests itself as a once-loved puppy abandoned at the front door of the home where it was raised. At last, Odysseus passed through the door. Men swarm the huge hall, devour his meat, sip his wine, and vie for a Penelope. In front of them, the legitimate owner poses as a beggar. He travels from person to person requesting food, not because he needs their leftovers, but rather to watch how they behave. Some offer him a gift. He is viewed as an intruder by others. The most combative, Antinous, strikes him in the shoulder and tosses a stool at him. Ulysses absorbs the blow without collapsing. Inwardly, he curses the man, but says nothing. Telemachus must control his rage after seeing the violence. Now the stillness is shared by father and son. Their adversaries are all around them, and although they can respond, they must wait. Penelope finds out that a man who just came says he knows something about Ulysses. She wants to talk to him. In order to avoid the suitor's attention, the beggar first reschedules the appointment for the evening. When they eventually cross paths, Ulysses is seated in front of the woman he travelled across the ocean to be with. He is unrecognizable to Penelope. She tells him about the moment the maidservants revealed her secret, the trick of the undone fabric during the night, and the pressure from the suitors. Ulysses hears the tale that he was only aware of through predictions and other people's testimonies. The precise course of his absence is in front of him. He assumes a different name and says he once welcomed Ulysses. Penelope starts crying because of how accurately he describes the king's attire. She does not, however, allow hope to overwhelm her. Lies have already been spoken by far too many strangers. She's reassured by the beggar that Ulysses is close and will return shortly. Then Penelope gives Euryclea, an elderly servant, instructions to wash the guest's feet. When Ulysses was younger, the woman looked after him. She touches a scar from a wild boar hunt on his leg. She knows who he is. Before she could scream, Ulysses gently grabbed her throat and told her to stop. Penelope, who is seated close by, cannot comprehend what has just transpired. But a new person now understands the truth. The option she has chosen to force on the suitors is then disclosed. She fetched the bow of Ulysses. She will marry the man who can string it and shoot an arrow through a row of 12 axes. The suitors appear to be getting the triumph they have been hoping for 4 years with this duel. In actuality, Penelope has just entered the big hall with the weapon that only Ulysses actually knows how to use. It is no longer necessary for the king to make his name known in a speech. He will be represented by his bow. The quiver full of arrows and the bow are brought into the room. Penelope displays it to the suitors as if it were a relic from a bygone era. Before Troy, before the storms, before this mansion became the venue for their feasts, it belonged to Ulysses. Drawing the weapon, putting an arrow on the string, and striking the target through the 12 aligned axes seems to be a straightforward description of the competition. However, the bow is not your typical weapon. It is a component of the king's identity as well. Telemachus declares that he wants to try the challenge first and sets up the access. His gesture is unexpected. Her kid wishes to compare his own power to that of his father, who is not present, but Penelope had planned the fight for those who claim to be her spouse. He picks up the bow, puts it down, pulls the string, and is unsuccessful. He begins once more. Something shifts on the third try. Telemachus seemed to be about to achieve success. Still in disguise, Ulysses gives him a covert signal. The young man pauses and feigns dismay. The stage they've reached since their reconnection is revealed by this detail. Telemachus may pull the bow, but he does not yet have the opportunity. The father must first be exposed by the weapon. In order to maintain the shared plan, the son consents to sacrifice a personal demonstration. Then, one by one, the suitors make an attempt to reduce its resistance. They heat the bow, lubricate it, and experiment with alternative placements. Their bodies are young, having been fed by Ulysses' reserves 4 years. They saw themselves as Ithaca's most powerful men. Even though they have already divided the king's belongings, none of them are able to strung his bow completely. This incapacity reveals the vulnerability concealed beneath their conceit. They know how to frighten a young heir, take over a home, and scare a lonely mother. They have no idea how to carry what gave Ulysses his power, without being able to replicate the gesture that represented his dominion. They aspire to own it. Antinous suggests delaying the competition to the following day. He calls for an Apollo festival and advises the men to make sacrifices before beginning over. By making this choice, he would be able to postpone the humiliation of everyone and possibly devise a different strategy. At that point, the beggar requests permission to attempt. The response happens right away. The suitors erupted in laughter, which was followed by whirring. They are more afraid of the display of their own inferiority than they are of an elderly guy winning the competition. Their claim to dominance would look absurd in front of the whole home. This weak stranger triumphed where they all failed. He is insulted by Antinous, who tells him to remain where he is. Penelope responds that it's unlikely the stranger wants to wed her. She only wants to know that he is capable of handling the man's firearm. In turn, Telemachus steps in. In front of the suitors, he gives his mother a strong order for the first time. He tells her that the men of the house now have the final say over the bow and asks her to go back to her chambers. Although it seems harsh, Penelope is protected by this statement. Telemachus is aware of the impending event. Before the conflict breaks out, he removes her from the hallway. According to the Homeric story, Athena then puts her to sleep, so she won't see the judgment that has been prepared in her name. Meanwhile, Philautius, the devoted shepherd, and Eumaeus were privately informed of Ulysses' identity. He gave them to assignments after displaying his scar, which was indisputable evidence. Despite the objections, Eumaeus must bring the bow. Philautius will securely lock the entrances and shut the courtyard doors. The suitors continue to think they are free to exit the hall whenever they want. They don't realize that the palace is turning into a restricted area, much like Polyphemus' cave, but with a clear twist. Ulysses isn't the prisoner this time. He's in charge of the exit. The beggar receives the bow from Eumaeus. Ulysses looks at it, like a musician rediscovering an instrument he has known forever. He inspects the wood, the string, and the fittings. He makes sure that nothing was harmed while he was away. Some of the suitors note how familiar his movements are, but they are still laughing. Ulysses pulls the bowstring without seeming to effort. The sound that is produced is crisp and clean. He positions an arrow, points it toward the axe's alignment, and fires. The bullet avoids contact with the metal as it travels through the 12 apertures. The competition is over. Telemachus gets to his feet, grabs his spear, and follows his father. With his bow in hand, Ulysses takes off his rags, leaps into the vast hall's threshold, and empties the arrows from his quiver at his feet. Then he declares his identity. The suitors don't move. They are momentarily perplexed. In front of them, standing in the position of the king they had proclaimed dead, is the guy they insulted, hit, and treated like a parasite. They look around the walls for weapons, but Telemachus has taken them down. Antinous is the target of the first arrow. When it hits him, he is still hunched over a cup. Before he can grip a blade or truly comprehend that the judgment has begun, he passes away. At first, the others think it's an error, because the beggar killed one of the most significant guys in their gang. They threaten to kill him. They are then informed by Ulysses that there is no miscommunication. He chastises them for eating his products, abusing his slaves, going after his wife, and conspiring to harm his son. They behaved in this manner because they were certain he would never come back. He's here now. Eurymach attempts to bargain. He accuses Antinous of being solely to blame and pledges that the survivors will kindly reimburse the spent money. Until Ulysses is pleased, each suitor will bring gifts, animals, and metal. However, money cannot make up for the years that Penelope lost, the conspiracy against Telemachus, the humiliations meted out to the faithful, and the breakdown of palace order cannot be erased. Ulysses declines. Eurymach is aware that they cannot be saved by words. He rushes toward the monarch, knocks over a table to use it as cover, and exhorts the others to attack collectively. He is stopped by an arrow. After then, the altercation takes over the entire hall. Telemachus, Eumaeus, and Philautius shield Ulysses with his spears while he shoots. The suitors utilize whatever they can find as a shield, hide behind furniture, and search for ways out. But Melanthios finds a way to the armory. He is able to provide the imprisoned men with shields, spears, and helmets. Ulysses discovers that an access point has been missed when he witnesses them getting ready. Telemachus admits his error. He failed to properly close the armory door when he took the weapons his father and his comrades needed. Ulysses doesn't take long to chastise him. Before being evaluated in a combat, the mistake must be fixed. Melanthius is pursued by Eumaeus and Philautius, who apprehend and immobilize him to prevent him from providing for the suitors. Then Athena shows up as mentor. At first, Ulysses thinks that his divine ally has arrived to put a swift stop to the conflict. However, the goddess wishes to put the son's and father's bravery to the test. She doesn't give them an easy win. The suitors toss their spears simultaneously. Athena changes their course. Some struck a door, others a wall. Odysseus and his friends give precise answers. The faction that had ruled Ithaca by sheer numbers gradually collapses, making the scenario less of a duel. The suitors supported one another as long as the king appeared to be absent. When he returns, their oneness vanishes. Their prior confidence is replaced by negotiations, accusations, and escape attempts. However, Amphinomos had exhibited more moderation than the others. He had persisted on reading the god's signs and cautioned against Telemachus's murder. However, he had stayed at the palace, kept taking part in the feasts, and pursued Penelope's hand in marriage. He is confronted and killed by Telemachus. The judgment is painful because of his fate. While not all of the suitors were equally harsh, they all agreed to profit from the job. According to the epic's reasoning, everyone is ultimately bound by the repercussions of their failure to abandon an injustice. Two guys plead for mercy when the final resistance stops. Phemios, the bard compelled to sing at the banquets, is the first. Telemachus affirms that he did not voluntarily serve the suitors. He is spared by Ulysses. The second is Medon, the herald who had not taken part in the schemes and had shielded Telemachus. He is also spared. These exclusions are crucial. Ulysses does not attack everyone in the house at random. He continues to try to discern loyalty from opportunism, complicity from restriction. Although the carnage is nonetheless horrific, it is portrayed as a judgment upon those who decided to use his absence. Euryclea is summoned to the hall. She wants to cry out in victory when she sees Ulysses standing among his foes' corpses. He halts her. It would be sinful to rejoice in front of the dead. Death shouldn't be a source of amusement, even for those who have earned their penalty. The elderly servant is then asked by the monarch to name those who stayed faithful. More than just a military triumph is now required for the return. Rebuilding the house, re-establishing obligations, and facing the betrayals that have emerged within the home itself are all necessary. Cleaning is underway in the vast hall. The area is purified by the fire and sulfur. However, what has just occurred cannot be instantly erased by smoke. The location where Telemachus was raised, where Penelope waited, and where outsiders were meant to be welcomed, has become a battleground. At last, Ulysses requests that Penelope be awakened. Ascending to his quarters, Euryclea delivers the news she had long yearned for. Her spouse has come back. Ulysses was the beggar. The suitors have passed away. At first, Penelope doesn't accept it. Her reluctance does not indicate a lack of affection. She demonstrates that she has acquired the same level of caution as her spouse. She spent 20 years surrounded by gossip, fabricated accounts, and tourists eager to take advantage of her optimism. The mere desire for amazing news does not make it a reality. Still, she walks down into the chamber. Ulysses is anticipating her arrival. He has changed his clothes, cleaned his body, and restored his attractiveness. He regains his brilliant stature, thanks to Athena. Then Telemachus is shocked by his mother's seeming aloofness. Why doesn't she rush to her dad? After all this time apart, why doesn't she give him a kiss? Penelope responds that she requires evidence. Nobody else is aware of the indicators that exist between her and Ulysses. He will be familiar with them if he is actually her spouse. As a result, she gives Euryclea instructions to get the marriage bed ready for him and to remove it from their room. Ulysses grows enraged with these remarks. There is no way to move this bed. He constructed it himself around the ground-based living trunk of an olive tree. He raised the room surrounding the tree, sculpted the building, carved the tree, and used priceless materials to adorn the furniture. Cutting the trunk and destroying the connection to the ground would be necessary in order to remove the bed. Ulysses comprehends Penelope's trap by disclosing this information. The bed was never really moved by her. She wanted to know if the man in front of her was aware of the secret architecture that lay at the core of their relationship. And there is no need for a scar, bow, or supernatural intervention this time. Long before the conflict carried him far from Ithaca, the monarch is identified by the recollection of something he constructed by hand. At last, Penelope gives up all fight. She rushes to embrace Ulysses and sobs against him. She kept his memories safe for 20 years, but she could never be sure if he was still alive. She watched her kid grow up in danger, refused the suitors, postponed their plans, and put up with the conflicting stories that tourists brought. The man she had been waiting for, now in front of her. But he comes back weighed down by the years she spent apart from him. The absence is not eliminated by their embrace. It gives it a shape at last. A portion of Ulysses' agony is described. Penelope talks about her experiences in the palace. They start to develop a connection between two individuals who have undergone distinct struggles rather than precisely returning to the life that was disrupted prior to Troy. The entire meaning of the image of the bed, anchored in the olive tree, suddenly becomes apparent. Something stayed tied to the land of Ithaca, even as the ships wandered. The kingdoms crumbled, and the gods changed Ulysses' course. It was impossible to move the bed without destroying it. The core of their partnership remained intact, despite being threatened by absence and surrounded by lies. To give the lovers more time, Athena extends the night. The outside world is momentarily suspended by this heavenly act, but it takes 20 years to heal. For a few hours, Ulysses is no longer a warrior who has returned from Troy, a chase sailor, or a ruler who must punish. He describes how he attempted to get back to his wife while sitting next to her. The palace is not yet secure, though. The deaths of the suitors' sons will soon be known to their families. It is impossible for the corpses to vanish without causing a reaction. Ulysses is aware that a new civil war is likely to break. Out as a result of his house being recaptured. He searches for his father Laertes before to this showdown. The elderly guy voluntarily lives in poverty and sadness, distant from the palace, wearing tattered clothing. He tends the field as though his son's abduction had rendered the kingdom irrelevant. When Ulysses notices that he is hunched over due to age and grief, he does not instantly identify himself. He makes up a different tale. It may seem harsh to put Laertes through this additional trial. Ulysses appears to be unaware of his son's whereabouts and asserts that he previously welcomed him. When the old man finds out that the stranger has no fresh news, he becomes covered in dust. Odysseus is unable to endure this suffering for very long. He gives his father a kiss, informs him that he has returned, and displays the scar that Euryclea recognized. Laertes, however, need more personal evidence. Then Ulysses tells him of the trees, the pear trees, the apple trees, the fig trees, and the rows of vines that his father had given him as a youngster. This memory is from a time before the war, when trees rather than wars were used to determine the future. Laertes knows who his son is. Thus, multiple forms of recognition complete Ulysses' return. Argos instinctively knows who he is. Euryclea is aware of his scar. Athena gives Telemachus the explanation. Penelope makes use of the bed's secret. Laertes recalls a common garden. Since every connection has a unique interpretation of Ulysses, no evidence functions in the same manner. In the meantime, Ithaca learns of the massacre. The suitors' relatives congregate. Some point out that these young men had committed grave crimes. Some want to exact revenge on the person who killed them. The organization is led by Antinous' father, Eupides. He does not see his son's passing as a just punishment. The suffering of the family instantly turns Ulysses' condemnation into a fresh source of aggression. The men march in the direction of Laertes' land. Telemachus, Eumaeus, Odysseus, and their allies get ready for battle. Laertes regains sufficient strength to carry a weapon. The elderly father, the son who has returned, and the grandson who has grown up in his absence stand together as three generations of the same family. The conflict starts. One final time, Athena steps in with the power required to hold the spiral. Zeus makes his will known, and the goddess gives the order for both sides to surrender their weapons. A complete triumph of Ulysses does not bring about peace. It necessitates setting a limit on his ambition to hunt down the adversaries. The hero must ultimately learn to give up battling after Troy, the Cyclopes, the giants, and the suitors. This could be his journey's most important lesson. For a long time, Odysseus thought that any issue could be solved by power, cunning, or resistance. However, going back home is insufficient to re-establish order. Ithaca will become a new Troy, destined to perpetually replicate the same devastations. If he converts every defeat into a bloody debt, a final blow must not be delivered in order to achieve peace. This suspension marks the poem's conclusion. Ulysses has located his kingdom, his father, his son, and his wife. However, Tiresias had declared that he was about to embark on another adventure. To please Poseidon, he would eventually have to take an oar and walk far from the sea. As a result, the return is never fully closed. The Odyssey continues to inspire adaptations because of its openness. Despite winning, his hero does not turn into an innocent person. After saving his friends multiple times, he makes choices that make their situation worse. He stops 4 years even if he truly wants to go back. He is aware of other people's shortcomings, but he struggles to identify his own. Thus, Christopher Nolan has a character that is ideal for his films, a leader who must live with the price paid by those who followed him, a bright man whose brilliance yields as many answers as consequences, and a spouse who travels across time in an attempt to rekindle an old love. The expected spectacle is enormous. The official photos depict the Trojan War, the wooden horse, armies, ships, and landscapes that are traversed by a scale that is rarely found on modern peplums. The entire IMAX shot implies that the creatures, temples, and water will be created to be more than just illustrations. However, The Odyssey cannot be made to come to life by its visual magnificence alone. The main paradox of the story that Ulysses' yearning gets more focused on a small location as the globe grows. Larger must be maintained in the movie. He travels through kingdoms, encounters deities, hears the dead, and faces forces that have the power to wipe out entire fleets. But what he still wants is an island, a room surrounded by a tree, and a woman who can look past her outward appearance. This promise is reaffirmed by the casting. Matt Damon provides the experience of a character who is wise, physically strong, and worn out, more than just a quiet weight, and Hathaway can give Penelope the authority, distrust, and suffering of a sovereign who is the only one able to keep a threatened family in balance. Telemachus, played by Tom Holland, stands in for the generation that was raised in the shadow of a legend and must mature before the one they are waiting for returns. Robert Pattinson, Zendaya, Lupita Nyong'o, John Bernthal, Mia Goth, Benny Safdie, and Charlize Theron are among the announced cast members surrounding them. There is still some uncertainty about how Nolan will reconstruct the Homeric story because not all of the parts have been formally revealed. That's where the 2026 movie's biggest mystery is. Will Nolan adhere to the poem's disjointed form and present the experiences as the Phaeacians' recollections? Will he begin with Telemachus and Penelope, so that the listener senses their absence before learning about the journey? Will the gods manifest as tangible entities, as very imperceptible energies, or as an enigmatic presence on the periphery of reality? There is currently no conclusive solution to these questions. However, the Odyssey already possesses the framework necessary to unite the director's obsessions, the time that divides entities, the memory that recreates events, the concealed identity, the narratives presented from several perspectives, and the choices whose effects outlive those who made them. Despite being the strongest, Odysseus is not saved at the end of this tale. He survives because he learns when to talk, when to lie, when to resist, when to hide, and when to lay down his arms all too slowly, and at the expense of nearly everything. Certain that his name needs to be heard, he departs Troy. He goes back to Ithaca under a false identity. Between the two, he loses his mother, his fleet, his friends, the years he spent with his kid, and some of the self-assurance he had when he sailed. Therefore, the unharmed hero of the battle songs is not what eventually makes it to the palace. He is a survivor, and before he can live his own life again, he must establish his identity. To those who loved him, we are still moved by Ulysses' return because of this. It is based on a very common fear, coming back after a long absence and finding that the world has moved on without us, but it also offers adventure, monsters, and the grandeur of tales. This terror must be transformed into spectacle in the Odyssey without being lost in the process. The fall of Troy, the Cyclops, or the sea's wrath could not be the most potent scene if the movie is successful. A woman may finally realize that the person she has been waiting for has actually returned, while a man explains why a bed cannot be moved.